for it. Hello! If you are one of our poops watching on YouTube right now, I'm just letting you know, ooh boy. I'm gonna do my best to read to you, but I have genuinely been torn to smither motherfucking reams. Let me tell you what. It is unrelenting. So I'm gonna do my best, but the brain pudding, I have kept the brain pudding at bay with every fiber of my being. So I'm probably gonna slur my words. I'm gonna do my best. It's not YouTube's fault. No, it is not the poops on YouTube who are listening. It is definitely regular poop coven who did this to me all fucking night long. Okay, anyway, sorry. Okay, so here we go. Hello. Oh my gosh. Welcome. If you say Chris is innocent, I will black out. So welcome to this episode of Andy, I can only tolerate so much. If you say Nair is innocent, I'll turn the stream off. If you are watching right now, hi on YouTube, everybody. If you are watching right now, we are about to dive into, we're at the Good Girls Club in the Smut Hut, and we're gonna dive into Manacled. Trigger warnings, trigger warnings, trigger warnings. This book is a fan fiction dark romance surrounding Draco and Hermione from Harry Potter. The trigger warnings are extensive, so viewer discretion is advised. The trigger warnings include and are not exclusive to rape, mutilation, forced marriage, degradation, forced breeding, death, war, and suicide. Again, viewer discretion is advised. So where are we at now? Right now, if you're watching, please, Poop Coven, stop saying the insane asylums are innocent. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm gonna talk to YouTube. So where are we in the world? I don't know. My anus has fled the building, but where we are at in Manacled. So we have completed volume 1. Now, if you are unfamiliar with what's going on, I'm gonna give you like a summary of what's been going on. But again, I do encourage you though to watch all the chapters. The story is beautiful, it's dark, it's insane, it's profound. So where we're at, so volume 1, volume 1 takes place over the course of several months where our Hermione, my brain is so scrambled. We start the story out with Hermione is being held in a dungeon under Hogwarts, where she has been there for 16 months under sensory deprivation. And during that time, she has been wearing magical manacles that basically absorb her magic. So anytime she attempts to do magic, they sort of suck the magic into the manacles. So during that time, she performed occlumens on her own memories to protect the memories that are post-war. So this is after the war. Manacled is a story of what I truly believe Harry Potter would have really been if it was written for adults. The good guys, there's no shape or form where the good guys would have won. We are learning about that more and more, that like this pushback of the good guys, the Order of Phoenix using dark magic, is just ridiculous, because how would you fight fire with glue? Like, it's not enough. It's nothing. It's not even competitive. And so this story unfolds where the Order of Phoenix are demolished. All of the people that we love and care about, essentially almost all of them, are either that we're aware of are either dead, were tortured, or are now in a breeding program. So that's where the story starts. We have Hermione, who was held in sensory deprivation. She's taken out of sensory deprivation to be put in a breeding program. This breeding program is really a ruse. The breeding program is really a cover to just show that Voldemort's actually slowly dying. But they want to do this breeding program to like shift and show how powerful the Death Eaters are. So Hermione, they undergo very severe brainwashing. Think Handmaid's Tale. And during that time, then Hermione is paired up with someone called the High Reeve. We find out the High Reeve is Voldemort. Voldemort is the not Voldemort. Draco Malfoy is the High Reeve. So she's assigned to Draco Malfoy, who's the right hand to Voldemort. When she is in Malfoy Manor, she undergoes severe PTSD caused by the traumas that she witnessed as a healer, watching all of the Weasleys get slaughtered in front of her. And then also knowing Harry's dead, all this trauma that she endured, and then also the sensory deprivation. And then during her time at Malfoy Manor, she undergoes more trauma. She gets attacked by Montague, attacked by Draco's wife, Astoria, which was a forced marriage as well. She is, brainwashed still. She's afraid of, she's not allowed to do many, many things. She can't hurt herself. She can't flee. She still has the magical manacles on that are also blood-bound to Draco himself. So what happens is, the whole point is that she has all these like memories that are protected under her occlumens. And even though Voldemort himself and Draco are both very proficient legaments, which means they can invade your brain and go through your memories, neither one of them can crack through her protections. But then they think that if she gets pregnant by Draco, that the pregnancy will basically break open all of her memories. And so what happens is unfortunately Draco is forced to, yes, he does, and again, trigger warning, he's forced to rape her. He does. In doing so, he does get her pregnant. At the end of volume 1, she's pregnant. We find out that their child has an incredibly powerful magical signature, and it obliterates all of the protection that she did on her memories. And then we enter volume 2. Now, in volume 2, we now have all these flashbacks. And now during the flashbacks, just to summarize what's kind of been going on with the flashbacks, is that Hermione is a healer for the Order. She's the most proficient, skilled healer that the Order has. She sees the war from a very different vantage point than the rest of the Order of Phoenix. We see Hermione really honestly seeing only the most brutality, the end result of the damage of the Death Eaters. She sees the screaming for pain, the calling out for help, the gasping for their last breath, the terrible mutilations that are happening to these people, and she's begging the Order of Phoenix to use dark arts, but just in a defensive, not like, oh, we're gonna just start Avada-ing everybody because we're just like the Death Eaters. Just, you have to throw more at them than stupefy. Like, what the fuck, right? The more she pushes, the more isolated she becomes. The more Harry, Ron recluse themselves from her, the more she feels like an outsider. We find out that Ginny and Harry are having sex. Okay. And then we find out that Draco Malfoy, the High Reeve himself, the right hand to Voldemort, inexplicably, according to where we're at in the story, wants a turncoat. He wants to become a double agent for the Order of Phoenix. And at this point, we don't know why. And his only request is that he wants full pardon once the war is won, hopefully by the Order. And then, and that he also wants Hermione during and after the war. And again, we don't know why he's requesting this of her. She agrees, she consents, she says, I'm gonna do this, I'll do anything, like, I want to win, we have to win. And so Hermione and him start having these meetings, which are really weird. The meetings are like, they hate each other, there's like weird, cold sexual tension, but there's also like real distance. She keeps anticipating him doing worse things to her, and then he does something, and then he protects her. It's weird. She's healing him. Like, the dynamic is really screwy between the two of them. They're both, it's like they have a stalemate. They're both staring at each other with guns cocked, but neither one of them is taking a shot. We watch him being weirdly protective of her. Like, she gets attacked by werewolves, and he like loses his mind, and he challenges an alpha of the werewolf pack. Like, it's wild. Like, but we don't know anyone's motives. All we know is that Hermione's willing to do anything she can for the Order of Phoenix. That's all we know. So, yeah, so basically, and he's been giving them very good information that has been saving a lot of lives and turning the war. Every information that Draco has given has been pivotal for the Order. So I'm pretty sure that's like where we're at. We are, where's my thingamaboob? Okay, we are gonna do chapter 32, 33, and 34 tonight. We are on flashback 7. We are on flashback number 7. So we are gonna begin. Reminder, if you have any questions, you can put them in the YouTube video itself, in chat, or in our Discord, and I'll answer any questions you have regarding the story thus far. So, if we are ready to begin, chapter 32, flashback 7. The next week, Hermione got up even earlier to go foraging. She took vials and trays and fully prepared to potion ingredients before packing them away in her satchel. She couldn't afford to waste a week's supply again. When she apparated to the shack, she took several deep breaths, trying to brace herself before opening the door. She had concluded that there was a fairly decent chance that Malfoy would repeat the same dueling method again. The cruel, satisfied glint in his eyes the week before as he'd stashed his wand made her expect it. The room was empty when she arrived. She set her satchel in a corner and warded it. Then she stood waiting. Her fingers kept nervously tapping against her leg. She felt almost faint. She hated waiting. She hated being left to dread things. Her mind always began running wild with scenarios of what would happen. Usually her imagination was worse than reality. But Malfoy had an unusual talent for blindsiding her. He was nearly 5 minutes late. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to keep waiting. He said he would only wait 5 minutes for her, but he'd never said anything about how long he expected her to wait for him. She didn't think he was going to abandon the order just because he'd finally gotten to hex her. She was nearly ill with anxiety. She wasn't going to just sit there waiting for him to lash out at her again. She turned abruptly and took the wards off her satchel and slung it over her shoulder. She was stepping through the door when he appeared in the room with a crack. She stopped and stared. The mere sight of him gave her a sinking sensation. She felt like something was lodged in her throat and she could barely swallow around it. He stared at her. He didn't look irritated. He looked awkward. "I'm late," he said. She nodded and stepped back into the shack, closing the door. There was a pause. The same again this week?" she asked quietly, glancing away from him. "No." He said it so abruptly that she looked up sharply at him. He sighed and ran his fingers through his hair. It was the most overt gesture of discomfort she had ever seen from him. "I overstepped," he said, which was not an apology. "I won't do that to you again." "All right," she agreed automatically, not trusting him at all. She was sure that if given enough time, he would find some new vindictive action that he could rationalize. He stared at her for several seconds. Hermione suspected she still had a slightly wounded expression on her face. For some reason, no matter how much occlumency she used, she wasn't able to wipe it away entirely. He opened his mouth as though he wanted to say something else, but then swallowed the words. "What?" she asked bitterly, bracing herself for whatever he was about to do next. Bracing herself for whatever he was about to do next was the worst part. I said I wasn't going to hurt you," he said in a low voice. "And then I did. I'm sorry." She looked at him in confusion. He was such a pile of contradictions. "I always expected you would." His eyes flashed with irritation. She'd clearly offended his moral code again. "And yet, here you are," he said. "Yes," she shrugged and met his eyes. "Because if the Order loses this war, I'm going to die. And Harry, and Ron, and Ginny, and everyone else that I know. So, being hurt by you doesn't really matter." "No, I suppose not," he agreed, his expression cold. "If you're going to do it again, just do it. Don't make it a farce by having me try to fight it off," she said woodenly. "Just own it." His mouth twisted slightly. His rage suddenly rose a little closer to the surface. Hermione braced herself. He abruptly subsided. "The first thing we need to work on is your aim," he said, changing the subject. "All right." He drew his wand and conjured up a practice dummy. With the tip of his wand, he carved an X in the center of it and then sent it across the room. "Whatever spells you want, just do 10. I want to see your accuracy rate," he instructed her. She put her satchel down and got into position beside him, feeling keenly aware of his proximity. The target was about 15 feet away. She aimed for the X and cast a stunner, a petrification hex, several stinging hexes, and an immobilizing spell at it. She hit it 8 out of 10 times, but only got 4 directly on the X. She stopped and braced herself for Malfoy's scathing criticism. He was silent, which felt even worse. "You do mostly close spell work, don't you?" he inquired at length. "Yes," Hermione said stiffly. "Thought so," he said, and nodded thoughtfully. "Your spell technique is fine, but you're so precise you pay unnecessary attention to controlling your wand tip, and then forget to focus on where you're pointing. Hexes and curses don't require that much fine motor control. Most of them don't have complicated wand movements. Your over-attentiveness is doing you a disservice in combat." "Oh. On the upside, that's a fairly easy thing to fix. It's much harder to train a poor caster. Try a curse with a complicated wand movement, and remember to aim your wand tip while you're finishing it." Hermione cast about in her mind for a curse which was complicated movement. Malfoy was right. Most curses were simple. Stabbing, slashing, there were rarely more than them to that. She hadn't realized what a reversal in technique that detail was from healing. A spell came to her. Taking a deep breath, she whipped out the motion and made sure her wand point was over the X as the final words of the incantation slipped past her lips. A scarlet light darted across the room and landed squarely on the X. Immediately, a small jet of hot black tar exploded from the spot where the spell had made contact. If it had been an actual person, the tar would have kept protruding itself, but on the practice dummy, it promptly ceased. Malfoy chuckled. My, Granger, does your order approve of the curses you know?" "No," Hermione said in a bitter voice. There was no point in lying. The Death Eaters couldn't possibly be unaware that the Resistance almost exclusively used non-lethal spells. "I imagine not. Tell me, Granger, are you willing to kill someone?" Malfoy was staring intently at her as he asked. She looked up at him, meeting his eyes. He was only a few inches away from her. His expression reminded her of the moment before she kissed him, intent and amused. "I don't want to be cruel, but if it's between me or them, or to protect someone I care about, I'll do it." He kept looking down at her for another moment before smirking faintly. The cold deadliness of his eyes glimmered, and Hermione suddenly realized how very close to each other they were standing. "I imagine you would," he said quietly. Then he turned to look at the target again. 10 more spells. See if your accuracy improves now that you understand why you were missing." Hermione cast another series of simple hexes across the room and hit the dummy each time, 6 times directly over the X. "Keep going," Malfoy instructed her. She kept casting, but got distracted when he moved behind her, and she couldn't see him anymore. "Keep casting." His voice was directly behind her. Hermione steeled herself and tried to keep casting, but the nervousness of not being able to see him while still being able to feel that he was close put her on edge. Her spells went wide. Malfoy reappeared on her other side. "Keep casting," he said again. She continued, and her accuracy improved again. "You're too planted," he finally said, staring at her feet. She glanced down. "What is that?" he said, cocking his head to the side and looking snide. "A fencing pose?" Hermione blushed and shuffled her feet. With dueling in a battlefield, particularly one without apparition wards, there isn't really any advancing. You could be anywhere you damn well please so long as it gives you a clear shot of everyone else. The important thing is to be able to move quickly. An attack can come from any direction. Unless you've got a dueling partner who's covering for you, you have to be ready to move. He cast a spell across the room at the dummy. "Stick to non-lethal spells now," he said. "They'll ricochet directly back to where they were cast from." Hermione cast more slowly as she tried to keep on the balls of her feet and move rapidly away as soon as the spells left her wand. She got quite absorbed in it and half forgot that Malfoy was circling around behind her, watching her technique. "Merlin, Granger, you're so tense," Malfoy muttered from directly behind her. She started and jumped so violently she moved back into the path of a stupefy that was flying back across the room. Renervate. She awoke to find Malfoy kneeling over her with an expression of simultaneous amusement and aggravation. Tense, as I said, he reiterated. She sat up, shaking her head to clear it. She was unbruised, which implied that she hadn't fallen to the ground. Malfoy had quite possibly caught her. The thought of Malfoy holding her while she was unconscious was terrifying. She wondered how much time had passed. He stood and offered her a hand. She awkwardly accepted it and got up. Again, he instructed, and try not to hex yourself when I speak. She rolled her eyes and continued. When her pace managed to increase from glacial to sloth-like, Malfoy decided it was sufficient progress for the day. Practice if you can, he said. I have been, she said quietly. I was even worse a few weeks ago, if you'll believe it. Malfoy refrained from indicating whether he did or not. He just stared at her thoughtfully. You're too scrawny, he said. Hermione folded her arms defensively. There's considerably more to fighting now than just dueling technique, particularly if we're primarily focused on keeping you alive while you go on traipsing around the countryside. You're more likely to meet hags or werewolves than a band of Death Eaters. Well, there's always aberration, she reminded him. No, there is not, he said shortly. As the dark creature population here in Britain continues to grow due to the war, there are anti-apparition wards being laid over huge swaths of the countryside. If it's somewhere you'd likely to find magical ingredients, then it's likely that hags or harpies or vampires or someone else is going to want to live there. There's a very good chance you're going to be wandering someday and discover that you can't apparate away. Hermione felt herself pale. Do you know where? She asked. A few of them. I'm not in charge of it. And since no one else regularly goes ambling alone through dangerous forest before sunrise, most people don't consider it very relevant information. So, be careful. I'm assuming you aren't going to stop. I can't. He stared at her and gave a resigned nod. He withdrew a scroll and handed it to her. I'll come up with some sort of fitness regime for you that won't take up too much time of your precious time and won't draw attention. Fine, she agreed, not looking forward to such a thing at all. Malfoy suddenly looked slightly awkward again. Was there anything else? She asked. With a flick of his wand, a large book bound in faded black leather appeared. He handed it to her. She accepted it tentatively. Secrets of Darkest Arts. You found it, she said quietly. Hopefully it will be useful, he said, then he vanished. Hermione slipped the book into her satchel and hurried back to Grimmauld Place. She was elated that Malfoy had found it. It had been the only known book on Horcruxes that she had been able to find any reference to. Slughorn has said that Hogwarts used to have a copy, but he had only admitted such details after the school had been shuttered and taken over by Voldemort. Stashing all her prepared potion ingredients in her closet, she rushed into the library of Grimmauld Place to start reading. Hermione had been away training as a healer when the revelation regarding Voldemort having Horcruxes had been made. Horace Slughorn admitted that Tom Riddle had questioned him on the subject, and Severus had revealed that Dumbledore had been mortally wounded by a ring from the Gaunt House. Gradually, the Order concluded that Voldemort had somehow created even more than one Horcrux, although how he had done so was a mystery because no one knew how the dark objects even worked. They were almost certain, the reason Voldemort had been able to revive himself after trying to kill Harry as a baby. Tom Riddle's journal, which had nearly killed Ginny, had been one, the Gaunt Ring. But they weren't sure if there were more than that, or what the objects were, or where they could even find them. They had created a timeline of Voldemort's life following his graduation from Hogwarts, trying to guess if there were other points at which Voldemort might have created more. She read through the sections on Horcruxes that the new book had. It detailed exactly how to create them. A murder was required to tear the soul, and then an incantation to remove the piece of the soul and bind it to another object. There was no mention of creating more than one. Hermione wondered whether the soul containers had to be inanimate or if they could potentially be living vessels, considering Voldemort's strange attachment to his snake, Nagini. She outlined all the information onto a scroll and then carefully placed everything into a warded briefcase. She slipped it beside the desk and left it for Moody to pick up. They tried to keep actual meetings limited to diffuse suspicion. There was no particular reason for Moody to meet with the Order's healer every week. As she headed up to her room, she evaluated Malfoy's interaction with her that day. He'd apologized. It had been quite surprising. She pulled her notebook out from under her bed and considered. The previous week, she had made a page in which she detailed her best guesses regarding Malfoy's moral code. She reread the comments she had made the week before. Better than Voldemort. Conceit in his morals. Believes in choice. Rationalizes cruelty. Doesn't believe he is vindictive. She added a note. Considers his words somewhat binding. Tries to make amends when he thinks he has broken his own rules. The book on Horcruxes had probably been his way of trying to buy her forgiveness. She wondered if he'd been holding it for a while, or had only gone to the trouble trying to obtain it because he felt guilty over hexing her so many times. She added, thinks forgiveness can be bought. That was a very useful piece of information. Then she closed the notebook and put it back under her bed, replacing the words carefully. She lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling. She felt exhausted. She'd only gotten a few hours of sleep before getting up at 4 a.m. to go gather potion supplies. She'd run out of Severus's potion on the acid curse already. She had no more acromantula venom to make more. The curse was awful and slow healing. The damage it inflicted was immediate and hard to reverse. The potion Severus had invented was an analgesic. Analgesic, that helped to neutralize the acid and stop it from continuing to corrode the body once the curse was canceled. Severus had been correct about how easily it was used. A strong shield could stop it, but it had become the most frequent injury the hospital ward dealt with. It didn't matter where on the body it struck, the recovery was slow. Hermione had brewed every single other analgesic and alkalizing salve she could think of, but their efficacy paled in comparison to the potion containing the acromantula venom. She was getting so desperate she was considering trying to hunt down an acromantula. She knew that Voldemort had their service along with all the rest of the dark beings. Her eyes suddenly popped open. Perhaps Malfoy would be able to get his hands on some. If he still felt like he owed her a little, he might agree to it. The next week, her aim had improved considerably. She had been practicing with the ricochet charm on the practice dummies at Grimmauld Place and had grown more adept at moving around as she cast. Malfoy seemed vaguely pleased. He critiqued her form more and stalked around her, scrutinizing her technique in a way she found unsettling. When she finished, he handed her a scroll of things she was supposed to do in order to get in shape. Push-ups and jumping and crunches and something called a burpee, which Hermione vaguely recalled her cousin having once introduced her to. There were half a dozen other things included as well. Your aim has improved enough. Getting your stamina up somewhere reasonable is more important. Whenever you have time, do repetitions of these, he said, gesturing to the scroll. Hermione grimaced slightly, but stuffed it into her satchel without a thought. Any information? She asked, looking up at him. His expression hardened, and his mouth twitched as though he was hesitating. The Dark Lord will be secretly out of the country for the next week, which means that the response to Order activity will be somewhat delayed. If the Order had been waiting for an opening, it may be the edge they're looking for. I wouldn't suggest trying to retake the Ministry, but if the Order were to attack multiple prisons simultaneously, the response will be less cohesive. I'll tell Moody, she said. Then she stared up at him and started to open her mouth. He quirked an eyebrow and waited. She almost asked him about acromantula venom, but lost her nerve. I'll be going then, she said, dropping her gaze. He apparated away before she was out the door. That is the end of chapter 32. For anyone who's confused, we are reading a fan fiction. If you do exclamation Manacled, we are reading a fan fiction called Manacled of Draco and Hermione. We are on chapter 33 of volume 2. All of the previous chapters are on the Good Girls Club. If you would like to catch up, if you go to YouTube, exclamation YouTube or exclamation the Good Girl, the TGGC, you can read or listen to all of the previous chapters. So we're about to start chapter 33. Thank you, Andy. And thank you, Addie. We are about to start chapter 33. That was a fast one. Good night, Aaron Party. Love your guts. We are going to start chapter 33 with flashback 8. And welcome in, Lucas. Chapter 33, flashback 8. May 2002. The news regarding Voldemort's absence was the opportunity Moody and Kingsley had been waiting for. They had been slowly sharing the blueprints, prison rotations, and other information that Malfoy had been supplying the Order with, laying out plans, waiting to strike. They were ready. Charlie, Harry, and Ron had been urging for such an attack for months. At long last, everything aligned. It was the biggest coordinated attack ever made by the Resistance. Almost every fighter they had was brought in. They targeted several of the largest, most protected prisons, as well as the Cursed Development Division. Hermione was so stressed leading up to it, she nearly had a nervous breakdown. Stalking the hospital, brewing massive batches of all the crucial healing potions, trying to be prepared for anything. There was a terrifying doubt deep down that she might have sent the Resistance to its doom. That it was possibly all along an elaborate trap laid out by Voldemort and Malfoy. She kept replaying Malfoy's momentary hesitation, wondering whether it had been a sign of betrayal. Everyone else left, and Hermione, Poppy, and a handful of other healers waited nervously at Grimmauld Place, waiting to hear anything. Hermione nearly wore a hole in the floor of the foyer with pacing until the bodies started pouring in. It was a flood of dying and injured people. Her clothes and hands were drenched in blood, and the entire house was converted into a hospital in order to accommodate everyone. She barely believed it when she was informed hours later that it had been a spectacular success. The Order broke several hundred prisoners free and reduced the prisons and the Cursed Division to rubble as they fled. At the advice of Severus. Exactly. At the advice of Severus, the Order raided the labs of the Cursed Division and brought back a huge haul of many rare and incredibly valuable potion ingredients that Hermione had been unable to get her hands on for years, including an entire flagon of acromantula venom. Hermione nearly wept when Padma Patel handed it to her. The condition of the survivors brought from the Cursed Division was horrific. They were so horribly tortured and cursed that many were insane, their bodies destroyed and ravaged beyond repair. There was no recovery for most of them. She could only ease their pain and hope they'd die quickly. The animosity towards Severus among the younger Order and Resistance members aware of his role in the Cursed Division spiked to an explosive extent. Moody had to exclude Severus from the Order meetings in order to maintain peace. For the uninjured fighters, the coordinated attack was accomplished in less than a day. Moody had to exclude Severus. But for Hermione and anyone else with even a scrap of healer training, it was only the beginning. Hi, Jay. They were run ragged trying to care for the inundation of horrifically injured and malnourished people abruptly thrust into their care, in addition to all the injuries sustained during the attack. They moved the basic injuries out of Grimmauld Place as rapidly as possible to free beds for the complex curses and wounds that required Hermione's specialized care. It was weeks before Hermione could be spared to forage or laze. Malfoy had, in the meantime, summoned her urgently twice to retrieve notes he'd left, warning of an impending counterattack. Voldemort had been enraged by the blow and struck back at the resistance forcefully. Godric's Hollow was burned to the ground, both the Muggle sections and the magical. Voldemort strung together and hung the bones of Lily and James Potter from a gallows for the Order to find when they arrived. Voldemort scattered vicious attacks across Muggle England, swapping Hermione with a flood of cursed Muggles that she had to stabilize before the Order obliviated them and turned them over to recuperate in Muggle hospitals. Hermione pulled 24-hour hospital shifts with 4-hour breaks for sleep until her magic gave out entirely toward the end of the 3rd week. Poppy had dragged her out of the hospital ward and told Moody that if he didn't want Hermione to die or permanently injure her magic, then he and Kingsley would find healers to cover for her. Hermione suspected that Kingsley took several healers from St. Mungo's hostage for the 2 days when she was recovering. Poppy refused to meet her eyes or answer the question when Hermione had asked who subbed for her. After nearly a month, things finally calmed slightly. Hermione had run out of most of the locally foraged potion ingredients. She had headed out. In the lushness of late June, she had been able to restock most of her supplies quickly before going to meet with Malfoy. She had barely had time to think of him during the last several weeks. He appeared the moment she stepped through the door. As he did, his expression twisted and he stumbled slightly. They stared at each other. "You look awful," he finally said. "Thanks," she said. "What happened?" he inquired. "The Resistance doesn't have any healers with my specialty," she said in a tired voice. She stared at him. "You look rather awful, too," she said, looking him over carefully. It was an extreme understatement. He glanced down at himself. His face was tense and gaunt, as though he'd lost a dramatic amount of weight. His features were twisted and drawn. His skin was gray and papery looking. He looked as though he hadn't slept at all since Hermione had last seen him. "You may have noticed the Dark Lord was rather upset about the attacks," he said in a bland voice. Hermione felt herself pale, and her chest hurt as though she'd been struck. She hadn't even thought. She had the information, and she'd run with it. She'd worried over the possibility of his betrayal, but she hadn't even given pause to think that the legitimacy meant Malfoy might pay having given it to her. "What happened?" she demanded, drawing her wand and coming toward him. "It's fine," he said in a clipped voice. "What did he do to you?" "Fuck off, Granger," Malfoy said, grimacing. His fingers spasmed slightly as he drew away from her. Hermione ignored him and cast a diagnostic spell. He didn't move. The diagnostic indicated that he'd been extensively crucioed, probably right up to the limit. Given that he was still showing the after effects weeks later, or perhaps it had happened repeatedly. There was something else in the diagnostic. She cast a more obscure diagnostic spell to try to identify what it was. "What happened to your back?" she demanded, finding it difficult to keep her voice steady as she tried to read the information her charm was revealing. It was a mangled blur of dark magic and poison. She wasn't even sure how to interpret it. Malfoy's face tensed slightly. "The Cruciatus Curse is such an excellent punishment for failure," he said in a light tone, "but overusing it risks compromising the mind. Sometimes a different, permanent reminder is deemed additionally necessary." "Take off your shirt," Hermione demanded. She needed to see what had been done or she wouldn't be able to read the results of the diagnostic. The damage it indicated was an extensive combination injury, unlike anything she'd ever encountered before. "Leave it be, Granger," he said in a hard voice. "Your order got just what it wanted," he scoffed faintly. "I just hope it was worth it and you lot didn't only drag out a lot of useless cripples." "Let me see," she pressed. "Let me see. Just let me see." "Don't pretend to care," he said coldly. "Are you really going to act surprised? You expect me to believe you somehow didn't anticipate this? After all, weren't you hoping I'd die once you had everything you could get from me?" The bitterness in his voice was so acrid, Hermione could almost taste it. It twisted through the room, and Hermione could feel his resentment, his loneliness. No. I'm sorry. I didn't. She drew closer to him. He'd been hurting for weeks because of the opportunity he'd given them. With his ranks in Voldemort's army, the blame had surely fallen on him, even if he weren't suspected of enabling it. She hadn't even paused to realize, hadn't even thanked him. He just slipped from her mind. It hadn't occurred to her how extensively he might pay for it. I'm sorry, she said, reaching toward him, feeling faint with horror and guilt. I got so caught up in work, I wasn't thinking. She unclasped his cloak and gently lifted it off his shoulders. He flinched and stared at the ceiling, looking resigned. She slowly unbuttoned his robes and shirt and then, walking behind him, as lightly as she could, drew the clothing off his shoulders. She gasped. There were dozens of runes carved into each of his shoulders. Deep, straight down, cut all the way into the bones. The dark magic hanging over them was sickeningly palpable. Just standing near them, Hermione felt her body break into a cold sweat. Hermione had read of sorcerers who used dark runic rituals to bind their servants. The brutal ceremony had been outlawed for over 1,000 years. Malfoy had been conscious as the blood and magic was invoked in his flesh, as each line was sliced into him. The cuts of each rune were still raw, as though they couldn't heal. Even though they were clearly weeks old, it reminded her of a werewolf's injuries. The dark magic had become visibly septicemic. The dark magic had become visibly septicemic. She lifted her hand, but refrained from touching him. What did he do to you? Draco, how did he do this to you? Goblin wrought silver blade infused with Nagini's venom. I'm told that they may eventually heal, he said in a wooden voice. There's nothing you can do. Now that you're satisfied your curiosity, we should return to business. He tried to turn to face her, but Hermione stepped around him, casting several different obscure diagnostic charms and inspecting them. Her magic was stable again, although sleep deprivation made her head feel light and hollow. There were black tendrils beneath his skin from the mixture of the venom and dark magic. She could see the poison in his veins, halfway down his back, up over his shoulders, and around his ribs like a poisonous vine, crawling into him and sinking into the core of his magic. She summoned her satchel. I'm so sorry. I can't heal this, but I think I can help contain it. Please let me try. Malfoy eyed her over his shoulder, but didn't try to step away from her again. Hermione cast a complex spell and then, gently as she could, traced the tip of her wand slowly over one long black tendril. Starting near his lowest rib, she gradually forced the poison back towards the incisions and then siphoned the tiny thread out of the rune it had spread from. As she drew out the poison and contained it in an empty vial, she had to sever the connection between the thread and tissue with a sharp jerk. Malfoy nearly dropped to his knees as he screamed. It was a nearly soundless, guttural rasp of someone intimately acquainted with torture. What are you doing? He half snarled and half groaned. Is this somehow not already a sufficient amount of pain for you? Her Malfoy laid a hand on his arm, trying to hold him steady. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to hurt you. I have to pull out all the excess dark magic. It's poison. If you let it stay, your body and magic will try to assimilate it. And When you have dark magic in you at a cellular level like that, there's no going back. It just starts to eat you from the inside. Magic like that is why your Dark Lord looks the way he does. And with the quantity of runes, you'll have a few years at most. Either your mind or your body. Dark magic exacts a price. I am aware of how dark magic works, he hissed. His hands were balled into fists and he was shaking slightly. Then please, let me try to fix this. Draco dropped his head slightly and huffed faintly as though he were laughing. Hermione studied him for a moment. He didn't say anything else. She traced out 2 more threads. By the third, Draco collapsed to his knees. He was deathly pale and his skin felt cold and clammy to touch. She laid a hand as gently as she could on the front of his shoulder. She could feel the arc of his clavicle under her fingers and see the mad, pained flutter of his pulse beneath his jaw. Do you want me to stun you? She asked quietly. I could do it faster that way, and it won't change the efficacy, but you have to trust me. Malfoy went still, apparently considering. Go ahead, he said after a minute. You're already more than capable of getting me killed anytime you happen to feel like it. She braced him against herself, his head pressed against her diaphragm. Stupefy, she said softly, and caught him as his dead weight slumped against her. With a practiced lightning charm, she eased him gently to the ground and laid his head on his cloak. Hermione worked quickly. She had done the spell work once before when she'd been training in the hospital in Albania. It had been a single self-inflicted rune on an aspiring dark wizard who hadn't understood the dark magic he was trying to invoke until the poisoning nearly killed him. With Malfoy unconscious, Hermione's guilt was able to strike her fully. She should have realized. She should have come back sooner to check on him. She was afraid she was too late. The runes were set. Deeply. She traced out all the dark magic until she had 8 vials full of the mix of the curse and poison. She had to incinerate them in a magical fire. She carefully laid a containment enchantment around all the runes on each shoulder. It was a spell Severus had taught her. He'd used it to contain the curse on Dumbledore's hand. Given that the magic was in Malfoy's back, she was doubtful that it would have any effect, but she tried nonetheless. Malfoy's injuries were not intended to kill him immediately. Rather, they were meant to hurt and corrupt his magic. A gradual death sentence. Dark magic, like runic blood rituals, was deep and old. She read the oath. It wasn't a typical runic oath. Voldemort, in his vanity, hadn't utilized a traditional vow of loyalty and honesty. Rather, it seemed tailored to this specific failure. The runes bound Malfoy to be unhesitating, cunning, unfailing, ruthless, and unyielding, driven to succeed. Hermione wasn't sure how effective runic blood oaths were, but she suspected that Voldemort's overconfidence in the dark magic had spared Malfoy's life. If Malfoy had been forced to have an oath of loyalty and honesty carved into his bones, he would have likely been forced to admit his betrayal. Instead, Voldemort had accidentally used ancient magic to fuel Malfoy's drive to do whatever he wanted. The excess and cruelty was horrifying. It wasn't like a battlefield injury, quickly inflicted but slow to be repaired. The ritual had surely taken hours, while Draco was strapped down and kept conscious for it. The precision and uniformity of the cuts, the steady invocation of the dark arts, time taken to wipe away the blood before making the next incision, driving the tip of the blade all the way into the bones was unnecessary. It had been done solely for the additional pain. It was an oath of the flesh. There was nothing that required it to be written into his bones. He'd also been crucioed, either before or after the ritual was performed, possibly at both points. She'd felt she might vomit just thinking about it. Hermione pulled out her essence of Dittany. She only had a few vials of it left. She pulled out her Murtlap tentacles and crushed them together with 10 drops of essence of Dittany into the salve, which she gently pressed into the cuts of the runes. She couldn't heal the incisions, but she could ease the pain and reduce the potency of the venom so that they would recover faster. Then she cast a protective ward over Malfoy's back to seal everything in without bandages. She ran her fingers lightly over his forearms, feeling the rigid knots in his muscles from the cruciatus. It appeared he had at least gotten some therapy for that. Voldemort clearly did not want to damage Malfoy to the point of ruining him entirely, but he had had no qualms about torturing Draco all the way up to that exact line. Malfoy was a weapon for Voldemort. The decision to carve runes into him made Draco more deadly. They sharpened his edge, but also made him a short-term tool. Heavy use of dark magic was eroding over the course of many years. There was a reason dark wizards didn't tend to reach 100. They went mad or deteriorated physically. With the quantity of dark magic that had been emanating from the runes before Hermione treated them, Malfoy would be lucky to live a decade, possibly only a few more months before his mind began slipping. He'd already tended to arrive drenched in dark magic. Hermione's wand wandered up to her neck, and she twisted the chain of her necklace. Hermione's hand wandered up to her neck, and she twisted the chain of her necklace between her fingers as she stared down at him. She drew his left hand into hers. His long fingers dwarfed hers. There were the familiar calluses from flying and dueling on his palms and fingers. She lightly massaged his hands. The fingers spasmed slightly at her touch, even though he should have been incident. She tapped her wand tip across his hands at the various pressure points, sending mild vibrations into the drawn muscles to help release the tension. When his fingers fell open, she began bending and rubbing and massaging them until they could fully open and close without twitching spasmodically. Spasms like that could be life or death in a duel, interfering with a wand motion or a person's aim. As she worked, she tilted her head to the side and studied his face. Unconscious, his features relaxed from the hard, closed expression he usually wore. He looked sad. She felt so guilty it hurt. She also felt like an idiot. She should have realized he could have been killed. Unlike her, he had to have known he'd be punished for the attack he'd enabled. His hesitation. He could have prepared. It could have been a trap. He knew exactly which prisons they had information about. How had he phrased his advice? The response to the order activity will be slightly delayed. If the order has been waiting for an opening, it may be the edge they're looking for. If the order were to attack multiple prisons simultaneously, the response will be less cohesive. He'd given them their first massive victory in years. He handed it to them and then paid for it. It was his response that was delayed and less cohesive. It was his response that was delayed and less cohesive. Whatever it was he thought he could get by aiding the order, he clearly wanted it more than anything. She moved to the other side of his body and cast a gradual renovation spell on him. It reduced the grogginess and likelihood of there being a headache when he regained consciousness. While he was waking up, she began tapping her wand across his other hand and then massaging it. The instant he became conscious, she could feel the tension radiate across his body. He froze instantly. It had been, she suspected, a tremendous leap of faith for him to let her stun him. Trusting anyone did not come naturally to him. She kept coaxing his fingers into pliance as he turned his head. She could feel his eyes on her, but she kept working and didn't look up. "There's no need," he said after a few minutes. "I have a session with a healer later today." If it's the same one who has done nothing about your back, I would recommend feeding the idiot to a giant squid, she said sharply. He lifted his head and looked back at his shoulders with a pained grimace. What did you do? After I siphoned out all the excess magic and venom, I laid a containment enchantment over the runes. I can't reverse them, but hopefully it will keep the dark magic contained to the runes rather than sinking into your soul. I packed them with Murlap and Dittany to help ease the pain. I'm assuming you're already taking pain relief potions. He gave a faint nod. Hermione ran her fingers up and down his hand carefully, feeling the familiar wand calluses along his fingers, seeking out any traces of tremors and muttering spells under her breath as she bent and massaged them. Hopefully it will heal the incisions a little faster. There's nothing I can do about the scars or the ritual curse they contain. I'm sorry. I should have come back sooner. If I had, maybe we could have removed the bones and regrown them before it settled in. Now, even if I replace them and fleece you, the oath will reemerge. It doesn't matter, he said, snatching his hand away from her abruptly and getting up. It had to be agonizing to move, but he didn't make a sound. But he was paler and wavered slightly once he was standing. As you mentioned, you're rather busy. It doesn't appear you were off at the seaside sunbathing and willfully neglecting your pet Death Eater. Healing me was never intended to be your job. He was apparently feeling a little better, given that his sarcasm had reemerged. I should have come, she repeated. It needs to be monitored, and the salve, it should be changed daily for best effect. Unfortunate. I can come, she said. It will only take a few minutes. If you can spare the time or in the morning or evening, I'll come. He stared at her. Really? You have time for that? He asked snidely. I'll make time. He seemed to be considering something for several moments. Fine. 8 o'clock in the evening. If you come, I'll show up. If you can't, it's no matter. I'll be here. She helped slip up his shirt over his shoulders and buttoned it. She paused halfway up. I'm really sorry, Draco, she said. He stared down at her and quirked an eyebrow. If I'd known a bit of healing was going to make you so familiar with me, I never would have let you do it. She looked up at him as she finished buttoning. Do you not want me to call you Draco? It just seems rather odd to still go by surnames after so long. Assuming neither of us die in the war and you don't get tired of me, I'm guessing we're gonna be around each other for a while. He rolled his eyes doubtfully. Call me whatever you want, Granger. I'm not changing anything. Typical. She suspected that surnames were just another way to maintain distance, which was why it had occurred to her that perhaps she should begin referring to him as Draco. Subconscious distance affected behavior. If she wanted to get closer, she had to move first, and she couldn't let her own subconscious attitudes hold her back. Any information this week? He gave a short nod. The corner of his mouth twitched faintly. The new Curse Development Division is going to be in Sussex. It's budgeted to be a considerably larger one. They're expanding the laboratories beyond curses. It's a research facility using prisoners. Hermione swallowed. Of course. Hogwarts is being turned into a prison. It already had enough wards. It will replace all the prisons lost. They're purging it currently of any magic considered uncooperative. Something inside Hermione wrenched at the news. When Hogwarts had been abandoned, they had tried to take what they could, but the house elves and portraits had been bound to the school. They left them behind. Her mouth twisted slightly. I'm sure the school will fight it, she said. Undoubtedly. The choice was made because the Dark Lord is hopeful the news will enrage Potter, and it's intended as a final insult to Dumbledore. Hermione's eyes flickered up to his face and then rapidly away as he said the headmaster's name. She forced her expression not to change. I'll ensure Harry is braced for it and doesn't do anything foolish. He gave her a short nod. I'll see you tomorrow then, she said and looked him over again. Take care, Draco. I am so sorry. The corner of his mouth twitched for a moment, then he pressed his mouth into a flat line and his expression tensed, bracing himself before he apparated away. That is the end of chapter 33. We are going to start the last chapter in this episode of the Good Girls Club, chapter 34. I feel like they're going faster tonight. Chapter 34, flashback number 9, June 2002. The next night, Hermione slipped out of Grimmauld Place after dinner, claiming the need for milk from the market up the street. When she arrived in the shack, she stood awkwardly, wondering if Draco would appear. She suspected that he wasn't expecting her to make it. He arrived suddenly with a sharp crack, wincing. She stared. In the past, he'd always been fully dressed, shirt, robes, and a cloak for good measure. While she'd stripped him to the waist twice, both occasions had been mostly professional, and he'd redressed immediately afterward. He was just wearing trousers and a button-down shirt, all in black. The absence of layers emphasized how tall and lithe he was. He seemed like a panther, black, cool, and predatory. Practically speaking, it was logical and efficient. Fewer layers to remove, less weight pressing against his injured back, yet it felt weirdly intimate. He wandlessly summoned a chair and straddled it backwards while he began unbuttoning his shirt. He hissed and gasped under his breath as he twisted his shoulders to pull it down. "Is it hurting any less?" she said, hesitating slightly as she laid a hand on his arms. His skin was still unnaturally cold. Touching him sent a shiver of fear down her spine as he flinched faintly and his muscles rippled beneath her fingers. "Slightly," he said after a beat. With a wave of her wand, she carefully drew out and banished the murtlap and dittany and administered a very gentle cleansing charm over all the cuts. Draco jerked and dropped his head down against the back of the chair. "Fuck, Granger!" he snarled. His knuckles were white as he was gripping the chair. "It's done now," she said after a moment. "I'm sorry, I had to. Wizarding folk may be immune to most infections, but there's no knowing what else that knife had been used for. Or exactly what properties Nagini's venom has. It may neutralize your natural immunity." "A bit of a warning next time, please," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Sorry, most people prefer not to know. Bracing for it can make it worse." "I'd prefer to know." She stared down at the runes. A cold, sinking sensation came over her. The tendrils of dark magic were already beginning to creep out from the runes again. She had been too late. The runes would continue to poison him. She lay a hesitant hand on Draco's arm. "This is going to hurt again. Do you want me to stun you?" He glanced back at her and studied her face. Something in his eyes flashed for a moment, and his expression hardened. "Is there really any point?" he said. Hermione flinched and dropped her eyes. "Let me try," she said quietly. Draco stared at her for another minute before he snorted faintly and shook his head in disbelief as he looked away. "Fine. One more try," he said in a resigned voice before resting his head on the back of the chair. Hermione stunned him again. It only took a few minutes to remove all the traces of dark magic, then cast several diagnostic charms, trying to break down the layers of the ritual and find something she could deconstruct and nullify. The ritual was set. She was too late. She traced her fingers over his back as she wondered what to do. He had to know. She was almost certain he knew the runes were going to kill him eventually. A gradual death sentence for his aid to the Order. Whatever he wanted by aiding them couldn't be a long-term ambition. With the price he'd paid, she doubted he was planning to usurp Voldemort. If he did, it would be a short reign. The Order needed him. The First Wizarding War had lasted 11 years. When she told Moody what had been done to Draco and said she had offered to heal him and told her what to do... when she told Moody what had been done to Draco and said she had offered to heal him, he told her to do what she could. If Hermione couldn't find a way to stall the erosion, they would be extremely lucky to have Draco last that long. If he did, he'd barely be reliable at that point. Hermione reached up and ran a fingertip along the chain around her neck for several minutes before pulling the amulet out from under her shirt. She stared at the sun disk. Then she unclasped the chain and slid the amulet off. She pressed the tip of her wand against it and reversed the series of protective wards and charms it carried before placing it on the floor. She stomped sharply on the amulet and felt it break under her heel. When she removed her foot, a small white stone lay amid the crushed red glass and twisted metal. She didn't touch it. With a flick of her wand, she levitated the stone so that it hovered in the air. She could feel the magic emanating from it. It made the air hum. She reached over and pulled Draco's back into her arms, trying not to put any pressure on the runes. Then she floated the stone over and lowered it to the side of his chest against his bare skin. It started glowing brighter and brighter until she had to squint. Then she watched as the light slowly sank into his skin and faded away. Hermione stared, wondering if anything else would happen, if there would be any immediately noticeable effects. There wasn't an abundance of information about how this process worked. She performed a diagnostic and inspected it. Draco was sleep deprived and living on a high dose of top quality pain relief. He had muscle damage from the cruciatus, and the runes were still an unintelligible, mangled concentration of wounds and poison and ritual curse. The diagnostic change did not indicate anything else, which was normal, she thought. That was how it was supposed to work. After a minute, when nothing else occurred, she carefully leaned Draco forward in the chair again. Okay, here, I have a picture for you guys. Hold on, I'm going to make my camera bigger for a second so you guys can see this picture. Tell me when you've seen it for long enough, because it's an important one. You see the picture? Okay. Oh my god. Got a good look. Okay. You zoom back out. So. She reapplied the salve she made, pressing it in as lightly as she could before replacing the containment enchantment and all the protective spells. Then she slipped the remnants of the amulet into her pocket and renervated, I don't know how to say that word, Draco. He lifted his head sharply and stood. Hermione gently pulled his shirt back up over his shoulders. He stared down at her as she buttoned his shirt and then straightened the fabric before staring up at him. He had a tired expression on his face as he stared down at her. She impulsively reached up and touched him on the cheek. She felt his jaw twitch faintly under her hand as she studied his expression. She thought his skin felt a little less cold. His eyes glittered and the corner of his mouth twitched, but he didn't pull her hand away. "I have to go," she said. "I'll see you tomorrow night." Draco didn't say anything as she left the shack and apparated away. The next night, there was no poison or dark magic bleeding out of the runes. I repeat, the next night, there was no poison or dark magic bleeding out of the runes. Hermione said nothing as she quietly removed the salve, cleansed the incisions, replaced the salve, and then carefully recast the spells. Draco was more silent each night. He tensed and gasped slightly in pain as Hermione cleaned the wounds, but he rarely said anything unless Hermione asked him a question. "Is it going to be suspicious that someone is healing you?" she abruptly asked after several days. Draco froze for a moment and then laughed faintly. "Did that just occur to you now?" Hermione flushed. "It's not usually a concern." He shook his head. "There are no orders restricting me from getting them treated. If you somehow manage it, it'll be hardly the first time I've succeeded at something against improbable odds." His lips curled faintly. So, by all means, continue poking at them with your wand. Hermione continued without another word. She discovered, to her faint offense, how rarely anyone paid attention to her comings and goings. She didn't even need to offer any excuses for leaving Grimmauld Place every night. Harry, Ron, and Ginny had gone to investigate a lead on Horcruxes. Hermione had realized that several artifacts of the Hogwarts founders had gone missing during Voldemort's lifetime, and so the Order had assigned Harry to try hunting them. Hermione suspected that Kingsley and Moody had very little hope that Harry would find anything she thought it was. Sorry. Did I skip a page? I feel like I skipped a page. Hermione suspected that Kingsley and Moody had very little hope that Harry would find anything. She thought it was likely just a way to keep Harry from insisting upon fighting in every single skirmish. With the intelligence Draco provided, Moody and Kingsley had begun approving more risky and ambitious attacks. Their decisions were partly because of the opportunities that Draco had. Sorry, I have like a bug on me or something. There's like something on my fucking arm. Oh my god. Okay, sorry. That was weird. Sorry. The decisions were partly because of the opportunity that Draco had afforded the Order, but primarily because of the situation was dire enough that the Order had to either begin taking risks with long odds or conceding that they would win the war. Despite the success of the Order's attacks, it had also set them back severely. They had hundreds of new fighters to feed and house, and at the same time, their resources in Europe were steadily drying up as Voldemort's hold grew stronger. The French resistance had all but vanished. They had received word that Hagrid and Olympe Maxime had been captured and executed. Whoa, sorry. Oh my god, sorry. They had received word that Hagrid and Olympe Maxime had been captured and executed shortly after the prison attack. All of Eastern Europe was firmly under Death Eater control, while the Northern Europe countries were so occupied with keeping Voldemort's encroaching forces at bay that they had little support they could offer. Oh my god, I forgot about Hagrid. The Order was running out of money, running out of resources, trying to feed an army with personal vaults and secret donations. It was difficult for resistance fighters to hold jobs in the Muggle world. Hermione had nearly drained her own bank account, personally paying for potion supplies, as the Order was forced to repeatedly slash her budget, even while the need for healing potions increased sharply. They weren't starving yet. But Hermione was beginning to grow suspicious about how Kingsley was accomplishing such a thing. Sometimes she doubted that defeating Voldemort would even be enough. If he died with the control the Death Eaters currently had, there would be a good chance someone would just step in to replace him. Her mind always went immediately to Malfoy when that thought occurred. She had yet to really see a demonstration of his abilities, but based on everything the Order knew about him, he was considered one of the likely candidates to take over in the event of Voldemort's demise. Moody and Kingsley were almost certain that it was Draco's true motive in spying for the Order. According to Severus, the Dark Mark had several elements to it. It allowed Voldemort to summon his followers to him, wherever they might be. It also enabled him to locate his followers. They couldn't run. And, finally, the Dark Mark prevented bearers from attacking their master. Even if Malfoy thought he had the ability to kill Voldemort, he couldn't wield magic against him, not lethally. Draco would need someone else to cast the death blow. Hermione sometimes thought that becoming the next Dark Lord was indeed Draco's motives, but after the runes, she questioned that conclusion. There was something angrier and more embittered in him than ambition. The deadliness and cold rage felt more like desperation than pride. When she had told Moody that Draco had not demanded an unbreakable vow from her, the glint in Moody's eyes made her begin to suspect that he intended to use her to kill Draco at some point. She tried not to think about it. She couldn't think about killing him. She couldn't stand behind him night after night, trying to heal the runes carved into him and think about murdering him when he stopped being useful. Such coldness exceeded even her capacity for strategy. Her fingers trembled slightly as she recast the protective charms over the cuts. She tried using bandages, but the venoms reacted. "All right, you're done," she said quietly as she pulled his shirt up over his shoulders lightly. When she left, she didn't apparate immediately back to Grimmauld Place. Instead, she walked down the lane into Whitecroft. Draco's injury was eating into her detachment. It was causing her to go off mission. Death Eater, murderer, spy, target, tool. She repeated the list to herself again and again, but her conviction and resolve sounded hollow. She found a creek and watched the moving water glitter in the moonlight as she tried to force herself to detach. She shoved her hands into her pockets and then hissed and jerked her right hand out. She found her index finger bleeding slightly. A piece of her amulet had broken the skin. She'd forgotten about it. She pulled the rest of the shards from her pocket and tossed them into the creek before healing the scratch. He killed Dumbledore, she reminded herself. He was probably just trying to become the next Dark Lord. Death Eater, murderer, spy, target, tool. But then she'd think of his accusation, that she knew what would happen to him, that she was only pretending to care that he was hurt, that she was probably hoping he'd die once he wasn't useful anymore. The bitterness and resignation in his tone haunted her. Perhaps he expected her to betray him someday. The thought made something inside of Hermione shred somewhat, as though it were mangling her internal organs. Why hadn't he made her take a vow? What did he want? The mystery around him dragged her mind toward him, obsessing over every detail, trying to comprehend what drove all the inconsistencies of his behavior. The push and pull he exerted over their relationship felt like a tide. His arrogance and loneliness. He disliked her despite whatever fascination which had prompted him to demand her. He often seemed to wish he could have nothing to do with her. But he was so isolated. He couldn't bring himself to push her fully away when she gave him the opportunities to give in. It was as Severus had said. She had been a miscalculation on his part. Even though he appeared to suspect her manipulation, her draw was inevitable and apparently irresistible. Draco wasn't the only one falling into an obvious trap. She knew he was using her, using the Order, knew that he was manipulative, cruel, dangerous, and responsible for the deaths of countless people. But as she tried to unravel him, he grew increasingly tragic and terrifyingly human. She pressed her hands over her eyes and took a deep breath as she tried to clear her sympathy away. She felt that if she could just know what his motives truly was, she'd be able to sever the sympathy, root it out from wherever it had started, growing inside of her. She didn't feel guilty for manipulating him when she wasn't sure that she had the resolve to be able to eventually kill him. Sometimes she wondered bitterly if Moody and Kingsley regarded her as having any limits. Make her a whore, then make her a murderer. Did they just assume she'd want to do what? Did they just assume she'd want to? It felt sometimes as though they were walking her down to hell and watching as she pressed through the gates. She wondered how pleased they were to have a tool who would suffer in whatever way they needed her to. Moody was her handler. He handled her. Whatever trace of hesitation he'd had when he'd first asked her to give herself to Malfoy, he'd moved beyond it. She was useful, an excellent pawn for the Order. The key to the piece they really wanted. Malfoy. Compared to Draco's value, Hermione was an acceptable loss. If Harry and Voldemort were the kings on each side of the board, then Malfoy was Voldemort's queen. Gaining him was worth sacrificing almost every other piece on the board. He was unrestricted and deadly. Crucial. It made sense. Strategically, she saw the logic. She understood the necessity. But on a personal level, it hurt so deeply she could barely breathe. She hated herself. She hated Moody. She hated Kingsley. They'd take and they'd take, and she'd be left with nothing but ashes when the war ended. But they weren't really taking. She was offering. It wasn't as though they were requiring anything of her that she wasn't willing to do. For Harry and Ron, she reminded herself, it will be worth it. But something inside of her felt as though the war was corrupting her. She was twisting, reshaping herself into a creature that felt like everything she hated. Darkness gets into your soul. That was what Harry always said. Never mind how irredeemable she thought Draco was for killing Dumbledore. If she sold Draco out at some future point, she imagined she'd belong in a far lower level of hell than even he did. But she'd still do it. Minerva had been right. Hermione was fully willing to damn herself if it meant winning the war. She slipped down the bank of the creek, gathering up several stones, and began building them into a stack. Her mother had traveled a great deal before marriage and had told Hermione how, in Korea, the people would pile rocks up, each one representing wishes and prayers. Mothers would build large towers of prayers for their children. Hermione had built stacks in her backyard as a child, praying many prayers for friends. Heartfelt prayers that had lain unanswered for years until she reached Hogwarts. Hermione laid down a large foundation stones for Harry and Ron. Let them live, she prayed. Let them survive this war. Please don't let me lose them. Then she placed a stone for Ginny, Fred, George, Charlie, Bill, Molly, and Arthur. Percy had died during the Ministry takeover. Let them live, she murmured. She added stones for Remus and Tonks, Neville, Poppy, and Severus, and Minerva, and the Katniss orphans. She was afraid she'd be too selfish if she included everyone in the Order and the Resistance. The stack was somewhat unstable. She picked up one last stone and hesitated. If the pile fell, the wishes wouldn't come true. She stared down at the final stone in her hands, brushing her fingers across it slightly. It was cold, but the bite slowly faded as she kept hesitating, turning it over and over in her hands, holding it out, then drawing it back, and then holding it longer. Maybe she shouldn't place it. Maybe it was selfish. She'd almost put it back into the creek, then she bit her lip and placed it. If there's any way, don't make me responsible for Draco's death, she prayed. The stack wobbled, but didn't fall. She let out a sharp sigh of relief and nearly cried. She washed her hands off in the creek and then stared at the tower she had built. It was a silly, superstitious ritual. It didn't mean anything. But she'd given nearly everything for the war, and it had yet to be enough. Superstition felt like all she had left. She cast a spell to repel muggles around the stones and apparated away. She kept healing Draco night after night. The venom combined with the runic magic made the injury one of the cruelest she had ever encountered. No matter what she did, it stayed fresh. He should have been in a hospital or in bed rest, not apparating and spying and whatever it was that Voldemort had him doing. She scoured old healing textbooks and stayed up late into the night brewing potions she hoped would heal or at least ease the pain further. But nothing she tried worked. Nagini's venom was essentially a neutralizing agent against any type of healing, magical or non-magical. It should have eventually worn off. When Arthur had been bitten by Nagini in the Ministry, the venom had faded after a few days of blood replenishing potion. But runic magic interacted with the venom and had kept the venom isolated in the incisions. Hermione couldn't simply flush it from Draco's system. We have another picture. I'm gonna full screen it. Hold on. We have another picture. We're getting pictures in this chapter. Oh, fuck. Sorry. Oh my god. I'm touching a lot of stuff. Oh my god. Sorry. It's hard to move this for some reason. Okay, here we go. Another picture. super profesh. So it's all the way down his back. Like it's all, it kind of, I feel like, yeah, what I was going to say, when it's first described, I think you kind of picture it as like up only on his shoulders. No, it's like all over his back. Oh, let me go back. Big cuts, big cuts, and big, Okay, I'm gonna read the last sentence just to keep you guys refreshed. But runic magic interacted with the venom and kept the venom isolated in the incisions. Hermione couldn't simply flush it from Draco's system. Packing the cuts with essence of Dittany and Murtlap and keeping infection at bay was all Hermione could do until the venom wore off on its own. Draco finally spoke to her first after several weeks. "Be careful foraging," he said abruptly as she was pulling his shirt up over his shoulders. She paused. "I have been. I send detection spells out every time I apparate somewhere to make sure there are no anti-apparition wards nearby, and all my clothing is shielded. The Dark Lord wants the Order crushed within the year. He is growing confident about his hold in the rest of Europe. He's concentrating his troops and bringing in new resources." Hermione felt herself grow cold. "In related news," he added, "I've just been given a manticore. I haven't the faintest idea what I'm expected to do with it." The casual way in which he announced it made it seem like he had been given an unwanted spaniel and not one of the most deadly, semi-sentient dark creatures in the entire wizarding world. "You were given a manticore?" she repeated. She had to force the words out. Her chest felt as though it were being constricted. "It's only half grown, I'm told. McNair informed me that it had been dropped off at my manor," he said with an aggravated expression as he pulled his shirt closed. "Are you gonna kill it? Are you allowed to kill it?" she said, watching his pale skin vanish beneath the black fabric. "Well, I doubt that is what was intended, but it didn't come with instructions. Manticore blood is impervious to most magic. You could probably craft some very useful weapons with it." He turned to look down at her. "Such as?" Sorry. Hermione hesitated and then reached forward to finish buttoning his shirt and straightening the collar. They were standing so close their bodies were almost touching. She could smell the cedar in his clothes, and she cautiously rested a hand on his chest over his heart, feeling his heartbeat under her fingers. She bit her lip for a moment before looking up at him. His mouth was quirked in faint amusement as he stared down at her. His eyes darkened as she stared up at him. "I've read that goblin-wrought knives or arrowheads infused with manticore venom could cut through shield charms, she said slowly. "Clothing soaked in the blood would be impervious to almost all magic, like shielded clothing. But the magic wouldn't ever wear off." Draco's eyes narrowed. "So what?" he asked, watching her carefully. "You think I should kill my gift from the Dark Lord and then use it to make enchanted objects for the Order?" "No," she said, sliding her hand away and looking down. Even if you wanted to, I wouldn't be able to provide any explanation for obtaining them. And most members wouldn't use them anyway. Manticores are dark creatures, after all." Her tone was bitter at the last words. She drew a sharp breath. "Most of the fighters in the Resistance would get killed if they ran into a manticore on the battlefield. There's probably only 100 who would even know how to and are capable of killing one. So, if you could invent an excuse for disposing of it before your master decides to unleash it, it would be preferable." She edged even closer and touched the back of his hand nervously. She would beg. She would do anything to convince him. He drew his hand sharply away from her touch, and for a moment she braced herself for his irritation. But then he caught her chin and tilted her head back until her eyes met his. He studied her expression for a moment as she stared back at him. He leaned toward her until she thought he was going to kiss her. "You are always so pragmatic." She felt the words brush against her lips. Then he released her chin abruptly and stepped away. His eyes were glinting as he noted her confusion. "Don't die," Granger, I might miss you, Draco said, smirking before he vanished with a crack. That is a good stopping point. That's a good stopping point, actually. That is a very good stopping point. So that is the end of chapter 34. In this chapter, in this episode of the Good Girls Club, I'm gonna be so for real with you guys. Pivotal stuff went down. Pivotal. Holy hell, pivotal. If you guys have any questions, there's things I'm not going to be able to answer, and you're going to want to, like, wait. But if you have any questions about what happened, there was a lot of stuff that happened in this one. Like, a lot. I think that this one is the building blocks, the foundation for the rest of the series. So, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, what are you thinking? What are your thoughts? If you don't have any and you just want to wait, that's fine too. But this is the aftercare section of the stream. What was the amulet around her neck? So, Julie Nils, excellent question. I cannot answer. But I will say that the significance... Okay, I will say this. I can't say what the amulet is, what it does, where she got it from. I can't give you backstory on the amulet yet, but I will say the significance of the amulet cannot be understated. I will say that. The significance of the amulet cannot be understated. That's all I can say. But these chapters are very interesting because I think what's also, I know that, morally gray and it's very complicated. These characters are so nuanced, like they're so complex, and all of them are doing terrible things in some capacity. Like, you have, Hermione is emotionally manipulating him, using him. Draco, we don't even know what the fuck he's really doing, what his end game is. We can't even, nobody can figure it out at this point. She is now also dealing with the agonizing feeling of realizing that, like, Moody and Kingsley are using her. Just like they're using Draco, they're using her. And that they're really willing to just push her off the cliff. And that loneliness is crazy. I really, really, really love the stacking stone. I think that was an important moment too. I can't believe I forgot. Me too, I completely forgot. That's how crazy the story is, that Hagrid dying it didn't even register. I completely forgot. And my other thought, Manticore blood. Could I reverse the room magic? Julie Neal's very interesting question. I can't answer yet, but that's a very interesting thing. I will say that we're heading into the really fun parts. I won't say fun, but we're heading into the part of the story where it's really going to start taking off like lightning. Like, things are going to really start popping off. It's going to take a hot minute, but it's really, really, like, this was important. Are you surprised? I have a question for you guys. Were you surprised at how horribly Voldemort tortured and maimed and essentially, like, poisoned? Are you surprised at that? I'm just curious. Where's a little over 1/3 through? Yes, Addie. This is a good. I thought he was the golden boy. So was that, you weren't, Jaded? You weren't surprised? Not at all. They are all bad guys, so no, they do a bad guy thing. But how do you feel about Draco, who's the right-hand guy, supposed to be this, like, Voldemort's fucking second dick? How do you guys feel that that we don't know at this point how first of all, we find out that while Hermione was tending to all the wounded and sick, Draco, reminder, he paged her to come several times during those several weeks where she was like, I'm too busy for you, bitch, and forgot about him. And now, maybe she could have stopped it earlier on. That's what all the guilt is coming from her. But how do you guys feel that, like, that level of dark magic being used on Draco meant that he might have had a few months before he lost his mind, and maybe only a decade before he just died? What do you think about, do you have any thoughts about that? Because I remember when I first read, I was really surprised that Voldemort's obviously a terrible, 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 terrible tyrant, horrible, the villain, right? But I was still surprised that, a weapon as powerful as Draco was sort of expendable. I thought that was sort of interesting. They are bad guys, so no, they do bad. Not surprised at all. That was sloppy with that curse. It was, it was crazy, and he was sloppy. That's an also really interesting point That's very important, that he was sloppy, that he put the runes into Draco, but did not make it linked to loyalty. He made the runes only make Draco more deadly and more locked on his goal without making the goal be to succeed in one way or the other. It just made Draco even more, like, determined. How do you feel about Draco, the information Draco has provided? And do you guys, I want to know another question. Do you guys have any theories about why Draco is doing this? What his motivations are? If you know what the answer to that question is, don't put it in chat. I didn't think he needed to be tortured to go along with him. Who is Draco? Voldemort doesn't strike me as someone who has any loyalty to anyone, use and dispose, move on. Interesting. We only knew him as a bratty kid. Who was Draco, the man before he was tortured, is what I wonder. Elle, very good question. I wonder if Voldemort was wanting to set the timeline of this death to also have Draco die at the same time so they both go together. That's an interesting take. Okay, so so my question is, what was my question? Do you have any ideas why, any theories about what Draco's motivations are thus far? Because, see, by the way, at this point in time, we still don't know. We don't know from Volume 1 what the fuck was going on with Draco in Volume 1. And even now, we still don't know. So what, any theories, please do not share if you know. To me, it would just make sense of why he said, I want her before and after, because he didn't know how long he would even last and needed to heal her to make him comfortable. Interesting. Okay. Interesting. I mean, it's so, okay, I'm just curious. Okay. I'm so scared I'm gonna spoil something, so I'm trying to be really careful. Because I think that one of the reasons why Manacled is such a fascinating read is you can be this deep into a book. Okay, we are like, I would say we're like nearing the halfway point of the entire series, and yet we still don't know his motivations. We know Hermione's clear as day, but we don't know his. I think that's so cool. That's hard to accomplish. There's not even a whiff of a concept of a fucking idea. Draco is a switch hitter, plays for both sides, so win-win regardless of the outcome. Sounds like a Malfoy trait. Interesting, okay. He must have stood up for Voldemort, got punished, right? And back to thinking there's a good man there somewhere. Okay. I'm also trying to zip my lips. Yeah, I know. We haven't really been told anything. I'm just going off what the book has given us, which is Draco is still a baddie, but we don't know why. Okay. I think, and isn't that really I think it's also one of those things that's really, really what's so special about Manacled is that, you know, when you have, when you watch a true crime thing, you watch a serial killer movie or whatever, and the detectives are always trying to find the motive. What's the motive? What's the motive? Motives is what we're seeking because we don't understand all of his actions. We don't understand anything. He really is like an enigma, and I love that. It's so refreshing, and it's so interesting, and it makes us, the reader, and Hermione feel off kilter when we're with him because we don't know what to expect. We don't know what his reactions are going to be. We don't know what his motivations are. We don't know if he wants her, if he doesn't want her, if he cares about her, if he doesn't care about her. Like, I think that is such a testament to how interesting this writing is, that we went through Volume 1, we're at least a third of the way through Volume 2, and we are still like figuring him out alongside her, and I think that's so cool. Every chapter I flip-flop, I think he's bad, I think he's good, it's a good story. It's amazing. It's amazing. And let me just tell you something. I'm just gonna say this as a unilateral thing for dark romances. You know, I think that what is a better way to think about dark romance in general is morally gray. I don't think that Hermione is all good. I don't think that Moody, Kingsley, Harry, I don't think any of them can be considered fully good. There's layers to these characters, and there's better on the good side, closer to the light, and then there's really dark, off the scales, Voldemort, black as night, morally black, fucking corrupt, right? But these are morally gray characters, and that's why I think it's so interesting that we really can't decide where they're going. Were there any questions in last week's? Oh, that's a really good question. Let me check. I actually think that there was one from Ken, but I'm pretty sure I already answered it. Let me just double check. I'm gonna go to last week's. Yeah, there was one comment. Okay, yes, this is from a Hermione point of view. I think Hermione is flirting with him to keep him off balance, yes. And I think that's it. That's from Ken. Let me see. Let me just check Book Horrors. Just make sure I'm not missing anything in Book Horrors. No questions in last week's episode or in Book Horse. So if there's no other questions, I'm good to clap the cheeks of this episode. And if you ever have any questions, I think you're gonna have a lot more questions as we keep going. But if you have any questions, you can always put them in chat in Book Horse section of Discord or in the YouTube comments. So without further ado, thank you for listening to this episode of the Good Girls Club, chapters 32, 33, and 34. Next week's chapters will be... Wait a second. Let me make sure. Hold on a second before we... No. Oh my goodness. No. Next week's chapters will be a direct to YouTube. You guys will be getting a direct to YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube or if you're watching on in the Poop Coven Twitch right now, your next 3 chapters are going to be a direct video to YouTube. So I will let you guys know as a reminder, but damn, 35, 36, and 37 will be a not live reading. It'll be a direct to YouTube for next week. So direct to the tube. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Good Girls Club. I love you guys, and I will see you on the other side. And I thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're enjoying it so far. I can't wait to keep going. All right, let's do this.